All right. Well, welcome everybody to a new course with Bob Prentice, remembering and recalling names. And it was interesting that when Bob first brought up this topic, I was kind of questioning as to if this was a good lead-in to enhancing the patient experience courses. And lo and behold, last night as I was looking on LinkedIn, somebody had posted some of the Dale Carnegie principles. And for those of you that maybe don't know who Dale Carnegie was, maybe the history's leading customer service expert. And it just so happens that principle number 6 talks about remembering people's names and being able to call people by their names. So I thought it was just a great lead-in to today's course. So with that, Bob, why don't you, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Working Lunch series here. And as we get started today, this is one of my favorite topics. Obviously, you might have thought that our attitude session was one of my favorite topics, but this truly is a session that touches me to the core, and I hope it will touch you in the very same way. You know, before we go forward, Jeff, one of the things I like to do is always kind of go back a little bit to where we started in January with our meeting on attitudes for excellence. And maybe somebody in the group has a bit of a report to share on the subject of the application of attitude. We talked about seizing opportunities. We talked about being ready for the opportunities in life. We talked about being tenacious in our commitments, approaching life with that spark of enthusiasm, setting and achieving our goals with the goal-achieving formula. But probably the most important thing we talked about at that meeting was the attitude of having a proper mental attitude. And so I just wanted to open up the meeting today if anybody's had any opportunities to apply those principles we talked about and even some of the attitudes. So just an opportunity to share. You just need to unmute and share your updates with us. Anybody out there today?
So we've done a good job at the office, I think, of everybody just staying focused on when they're maybe the attitude isn't where it needs to be, they kind of regroup and step it up. And we all have challenging days, but really everybody's done a good job of keeping it high and even when they don't feel good or whatever, they're really pushing to do it. So I think it's been a good step in the right direction.
Excellent. Attitude is everything, and there's confirmation for it one more time. Thank you so much, Doc. You bet. Anybody else? Any feedback from the application on our last session? Just getting some engagement here with everybody. You know, Jeff had shared the quote from Dale Carnegie, you know, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And I was reminded of what Zsa Zsa Gabor once said. She said, I call everyone darling because I can't remember their names. And I run into people every day who tell me, Bob, I'm terrible at remembering names. I can never remember a name. And I like to gently remind them that if this has been some of your speech, if you go around saying you can't, well, you certainly won't. And so it truly is an attitude thing. And I like to remind people that having a healthy memory is like exercising a muscle in our brains. And as we do that, some good things will happen as we exercise our memories. And so it's an attitude thing. It truly is an attitude thing. It's a mindset. And I like to encourage people to develop that mindset of having a healthy working memory. I am also reminded of a cartoon that was on television years ago when I was a little boy. I remember the Roadrunner cartoon. Maybe you might remember the Roadrunner show. And with the Roadrunner show, there was also the Wile E. Coyote. And in his goal to get that Roadrunner, he would go to the Acme Tool Company. And he'd get all his gadgets and dynamite and everything from the Acme Tool Company. Well, if you have your worksheet, you'll see the Acme Tool Company is here on the worksheet, and we're just going to fill in some of the blanks here today so that you'll have some pegs that you can hold onto those things, those names, projects you need to remember. For example, in the first letter, the letter A is for the word action. When I want to recall something that's very important to me, I'll put some action into that process. The C is for color. I like to put a little color. I'll put bright colors, or I'll remember the colors that were present on the person's dress or their blouse or the color of their tie. Color is a very important part of recalling that information. The letter M in ACME is for yourself, or what we call me. I like to put me into the picture somehow if it'll help me recall that information that I need to recall. And the letter E is for exaggeration. And I like to really blow things up. And you'll see that here today as we move forward, as I introduce you to my favorite lady in the whole wide world here, Ira Brahms. And as I utilize exaggeration, some of us might even think it's kind of silly, but this is what it is required for us to really have that success in recall and in memory. See, it isn't so much that we don't remember. Where we struggle is in the recall. Our brains memorize everything. We just have to have a system to recall that information or to recall that person's name. And of course, we all know that recalling a person's name is obviously a key to greater success, especially as we talk about the patient experience. As I was preparing for this meeting, I was reflecting back on the successes and even the failures I've had in recalling and remembering people's names. And there have been some really tough experiences over the years. And that propelled me and motivated me to make sure that I'm conscious of it when I'm meeting people for the very first time. And so that's why I brought Ira Brahms to the table. You'll see Ira here on your worksheet. And Ira Brahms is a tool that I utilize to recall people's names. Now, in Ira's first name, the letter I is for impression. I like to get some kind of an impression of the person that I am meeting for the very first time, cemented into my mind's eye. For example, let me just say some names here. When I say Marilyn Monroe, for example, the name Marilyn Monroe, what impression comes into your mind? For example, maybe her blonde hair, maybe her flair and her style. Something about her makes an impression. Or if I say Bob Hope, when you hear the name Bob Hope, what impression comes back? Or when I say Johnny Carson, Johnny doing his monologues years ago, or Jay Leno and his chin. That's an impression that people make on us in our everyday lives. So that's one way to help us recall a person's name, is getting that impression on them. We're really looking at them, not just the outward aspects of a human being, but actually the inward also. Get an impression deep. Well, how do they make an impression on you? Not only that, but repetition plays, and that's the letter R, repetition. Repetition plays a role in recalling a person's name. Now, there's something I have to share with you. When we meet somebody for the very first time, oftentimes we as human beings will come up to somebody and say, "Hi, my name is Bob. What's your name?" And then they'll share their name. But by the time you want to hold a conversation with them, you've already forgot their name. So years ago, for me to have success in repeating a person's name, what I would do is I would ask their name first, because I know mine. Not too tough to remember my name, but theirs who I had to focus on. So when I meet people for the very first time, I'll come up to them, I'll approach them, and I'll say, "Well, and your name is?" And they'll say, "Well, Dave." "Hi, Dave. My name is Bob." And then what happens there is I get his name, hearing it, and then I play it back immediately. That gives me 2 opportunities for repetition. And in the meantime, I'm saying Dave's mind over and over in my head. This is Dave. This is Dave. Okay. Hi, Dave. And so that's a very important part of it. And if I have an opportunity, I will even write Dave's name down. That's part of that repetition. So once again, when you meet somebody for the very first time, try some different openings like, "Well, help me with your name." Well, I'm Bill. Hey, great, Bill. And your name is. So one of the best tools I found is using the phrase, and your name is? Well, hi, Betty. Nice to meet you. My name's Bob. And so my name comes out second. That's the important part of that in the repetition aspect of it. Oftentimes we have heard the importance of using an association. You'll find that in the letter A there, association. We have impression, repetition, and association. So we'll use some type of an association. We like to associate their name with something else, something that we can hook it onto. So I brought some hooks for us here today, and that's in Ira's last name. These are some really good hooks, by the way. For example, the letter B in Brahms is for a business hook. If I meet somebody, I might try to find a business connection somehow. I met a Jim White one time years ago, and it was really important for me to remember his name. Well, the association that I used was I also knew of a company called White Drug. And so what I did is I used that association of White Drug with this Jim White that I met. And that helped me in the process of cementing his name into my mind's eye. Very important part of that. So some type of a business association. When I met Dr. Wayne Carr, for example, in my mind's eye, I had him driving a nice, car. And so that helped me in cementing that into my mind's eye. The letter R is for a rhyme. I use a rhyme quite often to recall a person's name. I met a gal over in Gillette, Wyoming several years ago in a dental office. I walked in, I found out what her name was, and her name was Randy. Now, this was interesting because I found out her name was not spelled in the way that a boy's name Randy is spelled. It was spelled R-A-N-D-I. And so that was important for me to catch that. But what I was doing in the meantime while I was capturing her name is I made a little rhyme out of it. Now, I didn't tell her what I used, but I said to myself, Randy is dandy, as sweet as candy. That was just a quick little rhyme that I came up with. And boy, am I glad that I did, because later that day, I was at the grocery store picking up some groceries. And who do you think I bumped into at the grocery store? It was Randy. And we ended up having a wonderful conversation together at the grocery store. She encouraged me to come back over to the dental office because they had looked over the information that I'd left, and the rest is history. They became a client. And I believe the meeting in the grocery store and me recalling her name played a huge role in me having a successful client relationship with them. So a rhyme, come up with some kind of a silly little rhyme. The crazier, the more silly, the better you'll have success in recalling that person's name when you need it the most. I use their appearance also. That's the letter A in Brahms, is for some kind of an appearance. I met a gal by the name of Mary Harrington one time. Now, remember when I said exaggeration? Exaggeration's an important part of memory. Mary Harrington, I wanted to use her appearance in part of the association. So as I was looking at getting an impression of Mary, a couple of things came to my mind. Mary, first of all, had a lot of long, dark brown hair, a lot of it. And so I took her last name, Harrington, and I thought, Harrington, ton of hair, Harrington, ton of hair. And that started kind of connecting some dots for me. And then I thought, Mary had a little lamb. And so then I was doing this, Mary had a little lamb, and then I was trying to connect the dots on that. And the next thing in my mind's eye now, I had Mary getting her hair shaved off. So she didn't have a ton of hair anymore. And so long explanation for the appearance, but boy, when I met Mary Harrington and cemented her name into my mind, it paid off handsomely weeks later in some business relationships that developed because of that. So you never really want to tell people how you're remembering their name. You don't want to hurt their feelings or anything like that. That's just private to yourself. And you'll find that the more you apply these principles of using a business or using some kind of a rhyme or their appearance as a memory tool, well, you're just going to have a lot of fun with that. When I meet somebody for the very first time and they have a unique name, I think of the meaning behind it. Maybe there's a meaning. That's the first letter M there in the Brahms formula. I think of when I meet people and they have maybe a foreign name or a name that is kind of unique. I like to find out if there's a meaning for that name. Even their first names sometimes have a meaning. And they know the meaning of their name, and that meaning is very precious to them. And that takes me back to that quote from Dale Carnegie where he says, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And so when I remember that, and then I think of the meaning, I got to find out if there's a meaning to this person's name. You know, cementing that in, it really, really helps. And they love to share it if they know it. And then that helps build that interest in that relationship at the same time. So you might want to think about one of your patients as you go through the list. You might think of maybe look at some of their names and I wonder if there's a meaning to that name. And the next time they come in, ask them, is there a meaning to your last name that you know about? I'm just curious, you might ask. And then it could create a really fun conversation just over their name. That's a touch point. The next letter M in the Brahms formula is a mind's eye picture. Okay, this is where the exaggeration comes in. And I use a mind's eye picture. And the more exaggerated, the better. And so, for example, I'll create a mind. Here's how I remember my name. I'm just joking. Here's how I remember Bob Prentice. For example, and it'll be a good example for a mind's eye picture. It's winter time, and there's this lake that's frozen over with ice, and there's a hole in the ice, and I'm bobbing. There's the bob. And as I bob out of the hole in the ice, I print on the ice. And so that's a mind's eye picture, an example of a mind's eye picture. Just like if I were to remember Dr. Wayne Carr, I would see him driving that car all over the place. That would help me recall him when I see him at the grocery store or at Walmart, wherever that might be. Mind's eye picture. And then, of course, there's the letter S, and that's for similar or same name. That is, my wife's name is Vicky, and if I meet another Vicky, it's very easy for me to connect the dots on that real quick, and then, or if I meet a Cheryl, my sister's name is Cheryl, you get the point. You use some type of a similar or same name to lock in and recall that person's name. There's Ira Brahms very quickly. And the key is, each time you meet somebody, try it. Or if you see some names on television, for example, you might want to practice this on the television or a video or a newscast or something like that. Just practicing it and go, okay, there's a Dave Johnson. Let me see how I can remember Dave. And Dave gave, just start making a rhyme if you have to. Johnson, John's son, and son of John. Just anything you can do to start connecting those dots to be able to recall. Once again, it's not so important that we remember, it's in the recall, because our brains will remember. We just got to be able to recall it back out and pull it back off that little latch that's hung on there. And so I'll use these tools. Sometimes it'll take 3 or 4 of the Ira Brahms tools to be able to really cement that person's name into my mind's eye. And because it's just vital. It's just absolutely vital for me to be able to do that. Impression, repetition, association, use some type of a business. I enjoy using rhymes a lot. That helps me to recall a person's name. Utilizing their appearance and making a big exaggeration out of that. Finding out if there's a meaning. Is there really truly a meaning behind that person's name? Mind's eye picture. Just let yourself go. This is where some creativity comes into it. Just kind of let yourself go and have some fun with this whole mind's eye picture thing. And just practice it one patient at a time. And as you're getting to know them, as they come into the practice and they come into to the different offices, continue to focus on their name at each of those touch points. Now, people go, well, Bob, I don't want to overuse their name in a conversation. Have you ever heard anybody do that? They'll use your name several times in a conversation. Got to be careful with that. You want to utilize it, but not overuse it, because people will think that you're manipulating them somehow, and you don't certainly want to do that. And so it's very important that you just gently bring it into the conversation, and then the sincerity will follow at that same time. So I went through this really quick. I know we've got a lot of things going on in our business worlds today, and I just wanted to introduce to you the Ira Brahms formula and see if you have any questions on the application of Ira Brahms. Anybody?
So have you had, I assume you've had this talk before, what is the response you get from people? Like, how long do they work to perfect this style, and just their response of improving this skill?
Just in response time and improving, everybody's a little bit different, of course. And one of the things I've had people tell me in this process is the more they practice it, the greater the success. It's just like anything else. And so, if you have, 10, 12 patients coming into the practice every day, your odds are going to increase if you say, I'm going to really work at trying to remember 5 names. Your odds of success are going to increase that much more. For example, when I go into a conference and there's 100 people at the conference, it's going to be extremely difficult, challenging for me to remember 100 different names. So what I'll do, for an example, is I'll set a little goal, and I'll say, my goal today is to really cement in 10 names. I want to really, so before the meeting, I'll go around the room, I'll introduce myself, I'll find out their name, I'll cement it into my mind's eye. So during the conference or the presentation, I can say, hey, Bill, what did you think of this? Or how would you apply this, Dave? And so that's, one of the things, you just set a little mini goal of how many you think you can accomplish in a day. And so that's where the most people tell me they get their successes in the application of it and just taking one little bite at a time. So one day, for example, you might just want to focus on getting an impression. The next day, work on repeating it in your mind's eye and saying it over and over, or practice, hey, your name's important. I want to get this jotted down, jotting down their name. The next day, work on focusing on using business associations. The next day, using a rhyme. This is your rhyme day. You're going to just focus on rhymes. And so as people start to do this, 2-3 days in, they're going, wow, I had no idea that I could recall names that easily. For years I've been saying, I'm terrible at names. And all of a sudden, 2-3 days in, they're having success. Because it's just an attitude. It truly is just an attitude. But that's a great question. Any other question? Anybody?
Yeah, Bob, this is Jeff.
Yes, Jeff.
One thing that comes to mind is that, in the healthcare setting, for instance, from a doctor's perspective, and even sometimes, for the staff, is they see the patient's name on the appointment schedule. And let's say, because the doctor pretty much knows the name of the person that they're going into the treatment room with. How would you, suggest that they bring, the name into the conversation with the patient as they walk into the room? Now, sometimes it's new patients and they're meeting them for the first time. Sometimes it's patients that have been there already. You mentioned earlier, not using a name too often, but what are some suggestions as to, because again, people like to hear their name. So how would you recommend they bring, the name into the conversation?
I would just start right off with, your name is very important to me, and I want to pronounce it correctly. So I would work on pronunciation also. That's a very important function. You don't want to have 3 or 4 sessions with them and all of a sudden find out you were pronouncing their name wrong. And so getting pronunciation right away. If it's a unique last name, for example, you might want to really just work on getting the pronunciation down. And so you're getting the right connection with them on that. They're going to see, the patient is going to see the doctor or anybody on staff who's really working at the pronunciation or just remembering. They're going to see that as a gift. they're going to receive that as, wow, they are concerned about me. I remember I went to a college class years ago out in Rapid City. It was a computer class, and the instructor made no effort at recalling or remembering anybody's names. And at the end of that, 13, 14-week class, she did not know one person's name in that class. She actually purposed in her mind, they're going to be gone. They're not going to be a part of my life. I have no need. And so that sting, that really hurt me years ago, that she didn't even take time to get to know me as a human being. So if we at the onset are going, let's get to know these people as human beings, not just somebody that's coming through the door, and taking some time saying, hey, your name is very important to me. And so I'm curious, is there a meaning behind your name? It's a unique name, or the nationality of the name, or am I pronouncing it correctly? Make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. I think that extra half a minute or 2 minutes of a conversation would be massive in increasing the patient experience for every connection along the way.
All right, very good.
Good questions, people.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Anybody else have any questions or comments for Bob? Now's your time. We got a minute or so.
Yeah.
All right, well, while people are maybe thinking of a question, I just want to remind everybody that the next session will be on Tuesday, the 27th, and that will be on building healthy relationships. So, Bob, do you want to just give maybe a 30-second overview of what you'll be training us on at that session?
We'll be talking about principles, human relations principles, and building relationships, and really the application of the principles, probably more than anything else. And as we apply the principles in our lives, the results of that, both on and off the job. Because actually what I'll encourage us to do is take these principles and apply them more in your personal life first, have some success there, bring them into the workplace, you have greater success there, and then you get this beautiful a transition of growth happening as you apply them both on and off the job. So building healthy relationships will be coming up here on the 27th. And then as we're laying this foundation of attitude and recalling people's names and building healthy relationships, that's going to be a good foundation for us to talk about. Now, how can we turn that into, because we're all in business, revenue for selling our ideas or specific treatment plans or our services, how can we take that to another level to create healthiness and healthier relationships and even healthier business as a result of this? So that's the strategy in the future.
All right, that sounds good. So with that, anybody, your last chance to ask any questions or offer any comments?
And really not the last chance for them, Jeff. They can get a hold of me anytime. I'm just a phone call away or a text away. I would be thrilled if you want to pick up this conversation and work with me even privately. I'll just do it for the fun of it. So, this is, like I say, one of my favorite subjects. And if you're really working at trying to make this a huge tool to be applied in your practice, by golly, I'll do anything in my power to help anybody. So I'm here. Anytime.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time and information today, Bob, and we will see you on the 27th.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for coming.